Thanks everyone for joining us. We're here today with our wonderful friend, Jennifer Grant. Jen's an author and editor based in Chicago and contributed to volume 2 of How to Heal Our Divides. Her picture book, Maybe God is Like That Too, won a gold medal from the Moonbeam Spirit Awards for Excellence in Children's Literature and was named a Book of the Year finalist in the Forward Indies Awards. Her second picture book, Maybe I Can Love My Neighbor Too, was named a Junior Library Guild official gold standard selection. She's written several other children's books, including 2 new titles coming out this year. Jen has written for publications including Women's Day and Chicago Parent. For more than a decade, she wrote features, restaurant profiles, and general interest columns for Sun Times Media and worked as a health and family columnist for the Chicago Tribune. Jen divides her time between her own creative work as an editor, and as an editorial consultant. She's spoken at many writers' conferences, including, of course, Writing for Your Life. And Jen also developed the faith and food section of the Compassionate Christianity website. Jen received her master's degree in English literature from Southern Methodist University. She's a member of SCBWI, the Authors Guild, Sigma Tau Delta, which is the International English Honor Society, and the 2030 Collaborative's Faith-Based Coalition for Global Nutrition. Jen is a founding member of Inc., a creative collective, and is proud to serve on the boards of both Open Books and The Secret City. Jen lives in Chicago with her husband, rescue dog Scarlet, and occasionally some of her 4 grown children when they come back to the nest for a roost. You can learn more at jennifergrant.com. So Jen, as always, it's great to speak with you and catch up, and many congratulations on all of your accomplishments.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm happy that we can talk today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to start off, what else would you like people to know than what I touched on there briefly?
Let's see. I guess something that I've been thinking about a lot, and maybe it's this wonderful turn of the weather in Chicago, is that I've become, over the last few years, more and more obsessed with the natural world. And my last couple of books for adults and for kids sort of, show that. But I spend a lot of time looking out the window at trees and birds, and I tend to just really daydream about today, for instance, I was walking my dog and I was looking at these new trees that have been just put in on our street. And I just love thinking about their growth, and that they will probably be big, beautiful trees after I have long gone from this earth. And so I love to think about the cycle of life and about nature. And, I always love it when people send me articles or books that they've read about the natural world. So I guess I'm inviting that from our friends in this community to keep sending me, wonderful articles that you're reading and book titles about nature.
Interesting. Well, one of the things I love about this time of the year is that the birds are just singing like crazy.
Yeah.
That's been true
Hmm.
more this year than I can ever remember.
Hmm.
We have more trees growing up, around us where we live too. And so it's just like a multiplicity of birds, it seems like.
That's awesome.
So we have lots of different things to talk about today, partly because Jen and I have collaborated on several different fronts. Since this is a How to Heal Our Divides discussion, let's start there. Your chapter in volume 2 of How to Heal Our Divides is about the Open Books organization. So can you share a little bit more about their work?
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone's interested, you can find it at openbooks.org. And it's a nonprofit that a friend of mine co-founded several years ago. And she and the other co-founder are both parents of kids who are in the LGBTQ community. And they both wanted to, just like all parents, like, you want to protect your children, you want to help them feel fully themselves and accept their identities and grow and, thrive. And so these 2 moms really noticed a lack of books about being different and about being queer and about finding your place in their school communities. And they noticed a real lack of books that were excellent in their kids' public school libraries. And so they developed this nonprofit that and one of the jobs that I've had over the years, which is such a pleasure, is to vet the books. But
Mm,
they give a curated set of books, and they actually give actual sets of books. They don't give a book list, but
mm,
they deliver boxes of books to public school libraries. It started in California, and now it's really in several states, probably 8 states now. Um, and these books are given to librarians. They're just shelved with all the other books. And a child goes to a librarian. And actually what I've learned working with this organization is that, and I always loved my public school libraries growing up, and I loved the librarians that my kids had in their public schools growing up. But I didn't know what a safe haven libraries really are for children who are different in
mm,
whatever way they feel different or marginalized. And so these books are books that librarians can direct a child to, and they can serve. You know, Keiko Feldman, who's one of the founders of Open Books, talks about how, and I think I wrote about this in my chapter, how books can be windows or mirrors. They can be windows where we can see someone else's experience or see a different part of the world than we know, and they can be mirrors and reflect who we are. So the purpose of Open Books is to provide sets of books to public school libraries that will serve as windows and mirrors for kids. And we hear all the time from librarians, from superintendents of schools, from teachers about the effect that these books have had. They're
mm.
all excellent books. Many of them are have won really prestigious children's literature awards. They're very carefully vetted, very carefully. I mean, I'm so picky, as you know, about children's literature. So I make sure that the illustrations are excellent, the stories are great, the message is really positive, and these books are affecting school communities. They're helping kids understand each other. They're helping kids, you know, to more fully embrace themselves and their little neighbors in class. So
Mm.
it's an organization I really love, and I'm really pleased to be on the board because if nothing else, I just love the fact that I know I get to read these emails. You know, we just got more yesterday actually from people who were either teachers or librarians, and they were saying this is life-giving. And I
Mm.
think actually these books can be life-saving
Mm.
because we know that the number of
Yes.
LGBTQ kids who are, you know, driven to self-harm, who take their own lives is, you know, enormous. And so this quiet, beautiful way of providing books that are, um, you know, that help every kid feel embraced and every kid feel accepted for exactly who they are. And we're at 900,000 students reached now.
Wow.
So if you think about that, so it's school districts, you know, throughout California, Utah, we've gotten some schools in Colorado, New Jersey, and I'm about to meet with some people in the Chicago area because I would love to bring open books to this area as well.
Mm. Excellent. Excellent. That's all good news.
Mhm,
But at the same time, we know what's going on in terms of book banning, right? Which is
mhm,
becoming a more serious and serious issue.
mhm.
Can you summarize a little bit about where things stand on that front?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if you follow as I do on social media, like the American Library Association or Penn Foundation or other literacy and library resources, there's never been so many challenges and book bans as we see now. And, you know, sadly, of course, it's so politicized and it isn't when people are standing up against these books, it's really not about the books in that they'll say, oh, well, these books are inappropriate or pornographic or whatever. And nothing could be further than that. I mean, these books, I'm a mom as well, and I'm a person who wants appropriate and wonderful content for kids. But but unfortunately, yeah, there are people who are fighting against librarians. Librarians are losing their jobs
Mm.
in different areas because they're speaking out against book bans. I think we're just in a really grim cultural moment, which is another reason why it feels really good to be working for Open Books in that there is a lot of kind of cynical and hateful rhetoric and actions being taken on the local level against libraries and librarians. Um, but Open Books is kind of able to still do our work. There have been challenges to our work as well, and we've had also to be mindful about how we publicize these books going into libraries. Whereas, in some places we've done huge events where librarians are given trainings around using correct pronouns with kids or directing kids to books that might be really helpful to them. And sometimes we've got kind of a flashy thing with, state superintendents of schools and so on. And sometimes we more quietly give the books to the librarians because a librarian will say, we have parents who are just looking to pull any book that they think, maybe, embracing LGBTQ people and so on from the shelf. So, it's both kind of a grim time in terms of the news headlines. There are also lots of opportunities to do good and to support librarians and to support kids in their public schools. So I try to focus on that. I just had lunch with a really dear friend who said, I'm about to turn 60 and I feel like I always thought the world was getting better and that people were getting more open and more progressive. And she said, I feel like the opposite is true and I feel so depressed about that. And so I think that's a normal response to feel that because it's awful to read these headlines and to also see how this sort of anti-LGBTQ and racist and all these different kind of messages, it does translate to real violence. We see real violence against
Absolutely.
communities. And so, yeah, I could get lost easily in feeling depressed about what's happening. It makes me feel good at least to have this project and other projects that are attempting to give an alternative to that, not just to kind of give over to this wave of, hate, I would say, but instead to support people and librarians and kids, where they are. So, yeah, I think it's very upsetting to see all the challenges and the bans going on, and also to know that the people who are waging these wars haven't really read the books. and I'm sure of that too when I've read some of the critiques, or sometimes our founders get, hate mail from people, and the person writing will say, your books are, overtly sexual for little kids and all these things. And they're not. And if anyone wants to see the book list, it's on openbooks.org. You can see the list of books that are donated to schools. And I'm really proud of that list. And we're actually going to update it soon. We've got some new books to add to it. So
Good. Well, let me know when those are available and we'll help get the word out.
thank you.
And, I hear what your friend is saying about things have been getting worse. I felt that way, without doubt since around 2016, I would say, where it was very clear. And, I've said this for a long time too, that I think things are going to get worse before they get better. But there's this one quote that I'll paraphrase, goes something like, you don't win a theological argument. You just wait till they die.
Mm.
And it's like, hate to say that, but I understand where that's coming from.
Mhm.
And if you look at the anti-LGBT movement or attitudes, whatever you want to call it, it's much more predominant in older people than it is in younger people.
Yeah.
Right. So, you got to feel that there's some hope, from a generational evolution perspective around that and other issues of, discrimination. So,
Mhm.
that's going to take a while to play out, obviously.
Mhm.
And I think things will get better in addition to just that. But in any event.
Yeah. 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 It's kind of a grim statement, but I think you're right. It does feel like younger generations are, well, and part of it too is people telling their stories and the stories that are provided to these school libraries in the open books curated, set of books are all stories that are so life-giving and so open. And so kids will be growing up with those stories. And of course that will affect the next generation. And it does already affect how kids understand each other. If they have, if a student has a friend and the friend has two dads at home instead of a mom and a dad, instead of going like, I don't know what to make of that, there's stories they can read and they can see it depicted and see how families come in all different shapes and sizes. And those kids will grow up with so much more, not tolerance, which is a word, that was used when I was growing up, tolerating other people, but embracing and celebrating and loving other people, which is, what I hope will happen.
Well, with more people like you, that'll definitely happen. So what can people do to support open books and more generally the fight against book banning?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, you can obviously give money to organizations that, to open books. Um, uh, on the website, there's ways to see like what amounts translate to what gifts of books. So no one at Open Books is being, we're volunteers, and all the money that people donate goes straight to books and to donating books. So you can do that. You can also ask the librarians for people in their own communities. You can look at those books and see if they're available in your child's public school library, and you can offer to donate books yourself to your local school libraries. In terms of working against book bans, I mean, I think for those who can and who have room and margins, it'd be great to get involved in local politics. Go to your school board meetings, run for the school board, speak out about your beliefs about this, speak out about free speech, speak out, sign petitions, get involved on the local level. And that's something that I think was a real fault of mine when my kids were growing up. I didn't really pay attention to local politics. I didn't think it was that important. Yeah. And now I think it's so important. And, I have friends now who have run for, city councils and for school board. And I think years ago, I would have thought that was sort of cute, and not that it's really important. And it is a way to affect real change in your communities. So I just, if you look at American Library Association or, different big associations, there are many ways that you can help speak out against book banning. And I think just making your voice heard about it is very important. And and support, look for, ask questions of the people who are running for school board or, and the other thing I would say too, something that I would love if even one person who heard this could do is find a way to support your local librarians. They're really under fire right now. I know a woman who is a librarian in the suburbs of Chicago, and this is even before this latest wave of kind of challenges to books. And she for the first time in her career, and she's about my age, she's in her 50s, she felt threatened going to work. Like and we're talking about librarians, the people who are quietly giving us information and story and teaching our kids to read and, all that. They're feeling so threatened. And, so I don't know, maybe we could have a, be nice to a librarian day or something, but, support your librarians whenever you can, or thank them when you go to the library. They're under incredible pressure that, those of us who aren't working in libraries aren't really aware of.
Believe that.
Yeah. And if anyone wants insight into what some of them are going through, look on, for instance, Twitter and do a search on librarians or, they're telling their stories, and the stories are really shocking in terms of the way they're being treated.
So let's talk about another project that we've worked on together, Raising Kids for Good. Would you like to tell people a little bit about that program?
Yeah, well, you could give the overview. I mean, I've been working specifically on one element of it, but Raising Kids for Good is a new organization that Brian has co-founded with Brian McLaren, right?
Mm-hmm.
And its purpose will be to, and it's about to launch, right? A soft launch this summer, And the purpose is to provide resources to parents and children's ministers and others of books and media and Sunday school curriculum and so on that is really life-giving, that doesn't promote sort of a toxic theology that the children who receive it will spend years trying to get away from, but instead, give resources to people so that they can help raise their children in a way that they will thrive spiritually and otherwise, that they will, grow in empathy, that they will grow in faith, that they will grow in care of the natural world. And so it's sort of, in one way, I don't want to do a binary thing of like, but it's providing an alternative to some of the kind of hyper-conservative sites and organizations that some parents have gone to. So many people want to raise their kids with a sense of God's love, but they don't want to say, but in order to be a Christian, you need to exclude this group of people, or you need to, hate this group of people. So the part of the project that I've been working on is, as you know, the books team. And so with a few other people, including publishing professionals and others, we have been looking at and creating a book list that parents and children's ministers can later go to and know that these are books that are promoting really beautiful, healthy, inclusive spiritual messages. So once again, I mean, I feel so lucky right on my desk right now. I have a stack this high of books for open books. It's more than a foot tall. And then to my right, I have a big stack that's for Raising Kids for Good. So, as my team and I are looking at the Raising Kids for Good books, we are looking for specifically Christian books that are just beautiful and life-giving. One of the ones I have next to me is this Dear Mama God, which is Deneen Akers' new book.
Yes.
And it's either prayers to God using the feminine, and another book that we're recommending is The Marvelous Mustard Seed by Amy Jill Levine and Sandy Eisenberg Sasso. And these books are beautiful and spiritually and scripturally sound and life-giving books. So I hope that, and as it's Pride Month, there's this one, A Church for All, that we're adding to the list. Just books that parents will be, progressive parents will be proud to give and read to their kids, and that kids will read and not be left with this idea that God is mad at them and they're awful, and and not be given an us and them sort of sense of spirituality, but instead a really beautiful, generative one.
Yay.
But I'm sure you can do better in terms of telling
No.
about
I mean, you characterized it quite well, which I'd rather people hear from you than as opposed to me. Anyway, so, so where do you think the effort will be going from here? Your specific team.
Well, I just had a meeting about it yesterday, actually. So what we're doing is, for the soft launch of the website, we identified 9 books that we want to highlight and introduce to people. Our next step is we're working on kind of some very specific sort of copy in terms of saying what are our criteria for these books and what are our hopes for the children who will either read these books or be read these books. And so I had a wonderful conversation yesterday about all this, and one person had just returned from a silent retreat and had given a lot of thought to this, and was actually sort of incorporating some ideas of like the pillars of Buddhism, about community and about sort of just, well, she talked at great length about what she has learned as a Christian from some of these, other spiritual practices, and how that can inform our work as a team. And she's actually, this is Margie Dillenberg. She is an expert in compassion and empathy building. And
Mm.
so she's looking at the books that we're vetting and thinking about. She's looking to see, do these help teach the skill of empathy and building compassion? And so, which I think is a really beautiful lens and obviously a Christian lens through which we can look at these materials. So
Excellent. Excellent. So all of this work will ultimately go on to a website that'll be called raisingkidsforgood.com. It's not there yet. It'll be there in a few months. Right now, we're kind of working in the background to pull everything together in some of the different areas that we're focusing on. So, later this year, people will be able to see the fruits of the work that Jen and her team have been doing. And we'll also have an ability for people to propose books to be added, correct?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, we want to hear, and once we have this, kind of set of requirements or essentials or vital pieces of what we'd like to see in the books, I'm sure that people will look at the site and say, oh, I know the perfect book that'll be just like that. And then, yes, we want people to reach out and say, you've got to check out this book. So I've been ordering books both personally, but also through publishers, just to give them a very careful look to see, to see what else we can add. So yeah, we'll have a long list. And one thing that Margie Dillenberg was talking about yesterday was just ways that kids could use the site. She's got some really great ideas about making it really interactive so that it's not only a resource for parents and children's ministers, but also that a kid might be able to go on and play with the list and figure, if they were interested in a certain kind of book or looking for answers in some way, they could use it as well. So that's another thing we're sort of playing with ideas around.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I know this is a labor of love for you. And, I so appreciate all the efforts you've done in this area. I think it's just such an important thing for the future generations. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. It's a joy. I mean, I get to sit I get to sit with a huge stack of books and a little pen and paper, and I get to read books all afternoon, written for kids. I'm learning.
You're in heaven, sort of,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. It's a real joy.
Excellent. So as you know, I'm in the early stages of launching another new business called Find Your Next Calling. You've had several significant shifts in your career. And maybe I'd really love for you to talk a little bit about discernment, kind of like, have you reflected much on the process or processes that you used to determine some of those career shifts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done both kind of formal work with coaches, with like an executive coach. I think I mentioned her before with you, but I've done formal sort of going to someone who's an expert in helping people craft their careers. And I've spoken to maybe two coaches like that over the years and worked, with one of them a couple of times a month for a year, so it was a real process. And I think it is helpful sometimes, we all get kind of lost in our head and, we've got our desires, our need to, generate income, all these different things. The life situation that we're in, there are people who are raising little kids. There are people who have a full-time job that they need to keep no matter what. And then, and yet their dreams and their desires are knocking up against those things. I think it can be really helpful to speak to an expert, to look and find a coach, because sort of like, it's almost like going to therapy, but it's not about your emotional or psychological health. It's really about like having someone who can just look at your set of skills, your life experiences, your the realities of your life, that you have kids, that you have whatever responsibilities, and say, okay, have you ever thought about doing it this way? And so they've seen and talked with so many people, and they know, they understand kind of the margins of what people have in their life, and they can help kind of shift you. And so that those kind of formal situations where I've received the help of a coach have been really helpful in discernment. I think too, and it sounds kind of, I don't know, cliche, but there are different seasons in a person's life,
Oh,
and, when I'm talking with writers who are, maybe sooner into, they're not as long into their writing career as I am, or they have really young children, or they're struggling financially or whatever it is. And they think, oh, how are you doing all these things? And I want to say, well, didn't always look like this, right? I mean,
yeah.
there were many, many years of my life where the only responsibility I had in terms of writing, that's why I worked, you mentioned that I was a
Yeah.
newspaper columnist. That's why I did that. I did that so that I would keep my writing muscles up. So sometimes I wrote 800 words a week, when I was writing my column. And it wasn't hours and hours, every day. It
Mhm,
was
mhm.
one Thursday afternoon when I had a babysitter, and so, I mean, I think it is really important also to do the things that really bring you joy. I mean, I think that, you know, and I actually had to relearn that message again this year, which was I took on some editorial projects that I just wasn't really sure if I was a good fit for them, or I wasn't really sure I wanted to do it, but I thought, oh, well, I'll do it. And I so regretted it.
Mhm.
and and so I'm trying to remind myself not to settle for jobs or situations or even relationships that aren't really life-giving. And in your heart when if something stirs you, a project or a person or an experience, you can feel it if you listen, right? And if you have some time of stillness. So that's the kind of more, you know, intuitive part of discerning your career and jobs and so on is to have enough silence or to make time for silence. You can really listen to where you're being led. And, for people of faith, we can believe, that the Spirit leads us, and so we need to create some silence and some quiet and stillness so that we can listen and we can hear. There's, I wrote somewhere, I don't even remember where, but I was so moved years ago talking with this monk who lives in community in the Boston area with other monks. And he talked about the fact that they live mostly in silence.
Mhm.
And I asked about that. And he said, yeah, there's just so much to hear from God. And I thought, wow, that's not how I experience now. Ironically, like the time when I was writing this piece about this man and talking with him was a really busy, crazy time in my life with kids, 4 little kids at home and driving them places and making their meals and making their lunches and, trying to raise them. And the thought of sitting, 10 hours a day in silence, just, I couldn't even wrap my mind around that. Now,
Yeah.
though, as an empty nester, I have lots of time for silence. And so I encourage people to be mindful of the time of life that they're in and to know that whatever time it is, it's not going to be forever.
Yeah.
But you can also, everyone can make some time, to reflect and to take some time just to be still and to be quiet and to try to listen to their intuition, to the spirit, whatever you want to call that.
Mhm, mhm.
So I guess that's a two-part answer to your question about discernment. I think it is helpful to talk to someone who understands and who can give good guidance. And it's important to be quiet and listen.
Mm, mm. Well, you've been like a freelancer longer than I have. But one of the things I've learned too is something you touched on, which is basically learning what to say no to, right? And have that, for me at least, it's been heavily guided by, what I'm either passionate about or not.
Hmm.
Because I found like my own internal motivation has to be to a certain level for me to do a good job of something. And if
Right.
it's not at that level, I ought to just not even bother.
Right. That's a slog. Yeah.
It's like,
Right. Yeah.
I wish I had more self-discipline. That might not be the case, but that's definitely true for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had a sort of responsibility to manage some volunteers years ago. And I initially kind of thought, oh, I'll ask this person to do this and I'll ask this based on their skills and all this stuff. And I kept kind of, it kept failing. Like I wasn't able to fill the positions that I needed to.
Mm.
But when instead I asked people, what really brings you joy? And it was not necessarily what I would have assumed based on their skill set. And so it's surprising. And I think if we do try to be led by joy rather than a sense of duty or, oh, well, I've always been good at math, so I better be the treasurer, or whatever. If we can, yeah, I mean, to your point about feeling passionate about something, um, feeling joy when you think about the fact that you get to do it instead of I have to do this. What
Yeah.
do you get to do?
Yeah.
So
It's a
yeah,
privileged opportunity.
yeah.
So outside of the coaches, and things like that, are there particular people or reference materials or email newsletters or, other kinds of things that you found to be helpful with discernment?
hmm Well, I just read this morning, every Thursday I get this James Clear. He wrote Atomic Habits. I've not read that book, but it's a best-selling book about creating and maintaining really great habits in your life.
Hmm.
He has a free newsletter that comes out once a week and I love it. And his name again is James Clear. And I've heard him interviewed on podcasts and so on, really like his ideas. Haven't read his book. But I find I find that helpful. I like to listen to different podcasts. I follow Lisa Congdon, who is an artist, um, and she has a class. It's like 9 video lessons, and it's called Time Management and Productivity for Creatives.
Hmm.
And I did this sort of near the beginning of lockdown in 2020. And although you can do it over the course of, well, however long you want to do it, because it's videos, I did it all in a day. And it was it was only a few hours. It's probably 2.5 or 3 hours altogether. But it was the most helpful thing for me as a freelancer and as a
Hmm.
person who writes and edits and has volunteer jobs and all these different things. But she just kind of lays out a very clear way of organizing your time and projects. And so that everything is sort of, you can see everything at once. And it's
Hmm.
basically sort of I don't, it's worth I think it was $25 to take this course, but it's worth the time just to have these ideas kind of cemented. But it's kind of like making a spreadsheet, like of all your different projects, small projects, medium ones, and noting where you are. And so for me, I have various clients that I have to invoice. I've got different deadlines for different people. And they're kind of sometimes fluid. If I'm editing, I have to wait, of course, for the person to have
Mhm.
written the first draft. So if I have that all in one place,
Hmm.
then when I'm sitting down to work, I can kind of skim over it instead of like looking through different emails or trying to find a text. I get things from clients, by email, by text. Sometimes somebody will send like an Instagram direct message, all those different things. And if I leave it there, I will certainly lose it. If I go to my workflow document that I created after taking this Lisa Congdon online class thing, uh, I just put it all in there, and then I don't have a missing piece. And so it's really helpful because then you're not spinning your wheels like trying to find information.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, so, and I've also, like in terms of writing projects, and it's a similar idea, I use that Scrivener, which is a software. And so every time I have an idea about a project, I go to that project, just throw it in there.
Hmm.
Then again, I'm not looking for a Post-it note somewhere. I mean, of course, I'm always jotting little things on pieces of paper, but if I leave it on the piece of paper, I will certainly lose it or not understand why did I write that weird sentence. But if I come home from being out and I've got a few little pieces of paper or the back, and this is often true, the back of a UPS, receipt or something, and I've written some idea, if I put it right into Scrivener in the proper project,
Hmm.
then I don't lose it and I know the context for it. So I think organization is so important for creative people, for freelancers, for writers, because we have so many different ideas and projects and responsibilities kind of swirling. If we can keep things organized, then when we actually have time to sit down and write, we're not wasting it looking for some little piece of information. So
I personally hate it when I know I'm looking for something that either was a document or idea or whatever, and I can't find it.
yeah,
Right. I
yeah,
mean, as good as Google search and, all this kind of thing is,
right.
Google Drive with search function, all that stuff, it's still, so a lot of times my version of what you're saying was that I'll send an email to myself
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and jot down something like that. So then when I get back in front of my computer, I can take that little note and then place it in my
Yeah,
file system, where it belongs on a particular project or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sure you're super organized because you have all these big things with moving parts and so many people and it's so important to stay. You could spend your whole day just looking for, where is that document? Yeah.
Well, it's just kind of interesting. Different people have their own mechanisms,
Right.
for kind of managing, themselves as well as
Yeah.
their, kind of information flow,
Yep.
workflow,
Mm-hmm.
so, and there's, I would say not one right answer. I
Right.
know like you talked about your spreadsheet dashboard.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of tried that. I'm not a spreadsheet person. I've used them, for financial stuff, but I use Word documents more,
Mm-hmm.
for my kind of, self-management structure, so to speak,
Yeah.
and Google
Yeah.
Drive with the folders and, things like that. So,
Yeah. And you're right. I mean, some people are allergic to spreadsheets. And I think I used to be a little bit before I took that course with her. But um, I guess I mean, it doesn't matter what everybody knows what is and isn't working. So
right.
if anyone's listening and they think, well, I can never find my thing, try it. There are so many different ways that you can organize your work life and your creative life. So I encourage people just to find the one that works for them and just stick with it, you know.
The other thing that's huge for me is my calendar.
Mhm.
It's kind of like my to-do list because I'll
Mhm.
block out, times on my calendar, say, okay, this is when you're going to do this. This is when you're going to do that. And
Yeah,
maybe, they move around, right, based on shifting priorities, but, it kind of sets the discipline for me,
yeah,
to get it done. And it also basically is a prioritization tool.
yeah, yeah,
Once it gets on my calendar is what gets done. And if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't exist, so, uh,
yeah. And I've heard people say, don't create a to-do list. If there's something
yeah,
you need to do, go on your calendar and figure out when you're going to do it. And obviously too with Google Calendar, if you put in, write this piece or edit this, it reminds you, if you put it, Thursday afternoon at 3, I need to write this piece. Then at 10 to 3, you'll get a reminder, which is also
yeah.
so. Yeah, I think I think that's another really helpful thing that if for freelancers, for writers, not to have this long to-do list, but instead to block out time on your calendar and use your calendar as a to-do list. That's a great one. Yeah,
For me, it's huge. I mean, it's just a make or break kind of a thing. But I mean,
yeah,
again, that's just me. I mean, I'm not saying that's applicable to everybody, but uh,
right.
it's incredibly helpful for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as you well know, building awareness about one's work has grown in importance,
Mhm.
aka marketing, to use the dirty word. What steps have you found to be most effective recently? As this whole landscape just continues to shift.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I would say this, and I've said this to you over the years many times, but I think it's not my strength so much, but I guess I used to be more self-critical about that, like that I'm not great at like promoting my work and, making a big wave about it. At the same time, I wonder, just like as you were saying about different people organize their time differently and it works for them, in some ways, like, I never promote or I don't try to promote, for instance, my editorial consulting because I have too much of that. And I really love the things that I am doing. And I need to say no most of the time to projects. So in some ways, and this maybe isn't the kind of answer you were hoping for or thinking about, but in some ways, like playing the long game and doing really good work I guess I'm less about, I guess I haven't done the work that some of our friends like Glennis Nellis, who's brilliant at promoting her books and puts a lot of energy into that. I haven't done nearly as much as she has done. At the same time, I guess because I'm playing the long game of just trying to grow as a writer, grow as an editor, deliver to clients and to agents and editors and so on, and deliver quality material. So I guess I feel like I've had longevity in terms of my writing and editing because I work hard. I try to be really communicative. I get that feedback a lot from clients and from editors that they appreciate how much I communicate. So if they send me something, even if I don't have time to read it, then I'll say I received it, or whatever. So I guess for me, I do have the sort of career I wanted. Like I have interesting clients to work with, and I'm helping to shepherd books into the world that I think are important and good. And it doesn't make me famous for being an editor or something like that. I mean, I've done so much ghostwriting more recently and often have to sign an NDA. And so I can't even tell you for whom or whatever. But if I really love the project and believe in it, and that kind of ripples into new projects because that person will recommend me to someone else. And so it's very satisfying work. I love it. So I guess that didn't really answer your question about promoting one's work or career, but I don't know.
Well,
Yeah,
maybe not in a traditional marketing sense or whatever,
yeah.
but I mean, let's dig deeper on this a little bit. You
Mhm.
pointed to kind of like your, communicative, your responsiveness, and I know you're very diligent about deadlines and things like that. But at the end of the day, what that does in my mind is build a track record of relationships
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
people that basically over time have led to you being oversubscribed, right,
Mhm.
in terms of opportunities,
Mhm.
and means you don't have to do,
Right.
the kind of outbound marketing, in a traditional sense.
Mhm.
So I think that's such a key learning and a key
Yeah.
aspect. And back to our earlier, part of the conversation, we talked about the long run. We talked about how, you know, what may or may not work today may work, at some point in time. And
Mhm.
it's like you there was a point in your career where you didn't have those relationships. You didn't have that
Right.
track record established, right? And now
That's
you
right.
do. So there's a certain part of, I'll say, patience,
Mhm.
perseverance, the view of the long haul, as you mentioned, that is just so crucial.
Yep. Yep. No, and creating and maintaining our networks are so important. And,
Yes.
not just when you need something, not just if, but keeping in touch with people, checking in with them. I think it's helpful too to have to keep notes on personal things. So if someone, you have a meeting with a new editor or a literary agent and they tell you something like, oh, I'm going to Florida with my grandchildren next week, write that down. And so that next month you can say, how was that? And that creates a trust and a relationship too, like not just looking at what a person can do for you by hiring you, but seeing them as a real person, knowing that they have a full life going on just like you do. And that helps as well. So yeah, I think maintaining a network is very important. Um, and being consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best titles for a business book that I ever read was Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty.
That's great. That's great.
Right.
Yeah.
It was all about, establishing relationships,
Yeah.
for the long run,
Right.
whether or not it appears to be useful or productive or whatever at this
Right.
point in time. And I've seen that play out for myself so many times of,
Yeah.
things that people with which I've established a relationship for one thing, later on ended up being a phenomenal collaborator for something I'd never envisioned even considering.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And people can snip it out so quickly if someone just wants something from you. It
Yeah.
doesn't help
Yeah.
it. And so, but if someone wants to collaborate or wants your ideas or wants, to share resources or idea, whatever, that feels so different than someone just asking, what can you do for me?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So you've done some great presentations talking about overcoming the imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
which is a really important thing, not just for authors, but I would say for people, going off and freelancing on their own in general.
Mhm.
So, excuse me. Can you talk a little bit about what some of your recommendations were there?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that whenever I've spoken about this, and I have several times now in person or on Zoom or whatever, spoken about this, people are always so relieved to know they're not the only one. So it's always great, like to say, no, you're not the only person who feels like a phony, who's afraid that everyone's going to find out that you really are not that smart or talented or good at your job or whatever it is. Um, so, um, so it's a relief in groups just to say to everyone, this is normal. And it isn't just people in the creative fields. I was just meeting with a neighbor who has some job opportunities and she's in business and she was feeling she's being welcomed to apply for this really high profile job. And she said, but the last person who had it was older than me, was more experienced or, all these things. But but the fact that 30 people in her company are asking her to do it, it
Wow.
means that they see her as the proper person to have the job. So it's very normal, across industries and professions and so on to feel this way. And it's not really the same as feeling insecure. It's like feeling like in some ways, I think, and the kind of research shows this as well, but that it's often people who really are excellent at what they do. But when you are smart and you do care about what you're doing, you also know what you lack, right? And so um,
Yep.
that can leave someone feeling like an imposter, but there are great strategies that actually work for battling those feelings. And one is just admitting that you're feeling these feelings, acknowledging it. And in positive psychology, it's called like name it to tame it. So by saying, saying to someone else, I'm experiencing feelings of being an imposter, or, just saying it does something in the brain to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
grab on you. Um, Another one, and there's a famous TED Talk. I think it's in the top 10 of watched TED Talks, but Amy Cuddy, Dr. Amy Cuddy, and it's Cuddy. She talks about power poses. And so if you're going into a new situation and you're feeling like an imposter, you're feeling insecure about a meeting or whatever it is, a presentation you have to give, she recommends like going off into like a bathroom stall or a broom closet or something and doing like power poses, like putting your hands up, standing up straight, sitting up straight. And she talks about, how our brain changes and the brain chemistry changes
Hmm.
based on the way we're holding ourselves. So,
Wow.
doing like power poses, like stand like Superman, these things, if you do that for a few minutes before entering a situation or a meeting that you're feeling like an imposter, that will help. One that I love is another strategy is that, again, because people who are experiencing these feelings are experts often in their fields, we all do have gaps in our knowledge, gaps in our experience, and that's just normal. And so by identifying what those are and then taking steps to increase your knowledge or increase your expertise, that's a way instead of feeling like, oh, I'm an imposter, I'm terrible at this, it's saying, yeah, I'm great at this. There's some areas I can grow. Guess what? I can take a class. I can talk to someone. I can hire a coach. I can actually address the gaps in my knowledge, the gaps in my experience. And that's one that I think is really important for writers too, because a person sitting at home feeling like, oh, I'm not really a writer. I'm not really great at this. I'm not, I'm an imposter. I've never published anything traditionally or whatever. Well, what are some of the areas that are weaker areas for you? Is it, dialogue if you're a fiction writer? Is it, plotting? Is it, what are the things that are your weaker spots? And if you're not sure, ask some of your readers, ask the people in your writers group, what do you think are my strengths as a writer? What are my weaknesses? And if you identify that, then go ahead and address it. And that's so empowering. take a class, get a book out of the library about whatever that little gap in your knowledge or your skill set is. And then you don't feel like an imposter. You feel like a learner. You feel like a person who's growing and not like a person who has to hide out and can't share what they've done because they're not that good at it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And outside of the writing realm, where it's so much dependent upon you as an individual, in a lot of other instances, more generally in business in particular, to the extent that you can partner with somebody
Right.
who is an expert in whatever it is that you're feeling less skilled in,
Right.
that
Right.
could go, a long ways to
Absolutely.
bolster that and make an
Yeah.
overall solution or overall, offer, much more
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah. Hiding out and isolating isn't the answer at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Yeah. I love this. Another podcast that I really like that's helpful in terms of discernment, also in terms of organizing one's time and so on, is Akimbo, which is the Seth Godin one.
Oh,
And
okay.
I heard a great episode of Akimbo once where he said his whole point in it was show your work. And to your point about partnering with someone and collaborating with someone, sometimes writers don't show their work. They go off and write and they're just nervous that it's not good or they want to polish it before showing anyone. It's so helpful as many times and throughout the process of writing a manuscript, whether it's 1,000 words or 80,000, to keep talking with someone, partner with
Mm.
someone, show the editor, show a writing partner, barter, trade services with another person and say, listen, I'm writing this. Can you read every 10,000 words and tell me what you think as I'm going? Don't wait till the end, but show your work as you go.
Mm. Very cool. So independent of all the things that we've been collaborating on and talking about so far, um, are there any future books or other projects that you'd like to share with people?
Well, so just a couple months ago, my book Finding Calm in Nature came out, which is for kids, kind of 7 to 10ish, and I love that book. It's so beautifully illustrated by an illustrator named Erin Brown, and so I'm doing a few sort of events around that right now, story times and things. And then this fall in October, also from Beaming Books, that Finding Calm in Nature is Beaming Books. Another book called What If I Can't Explain God is coming out, and that's a picture book, and it's about a little kid who's finds a lot of things hard to explain, including God. Who doesn't, right? And so that'll be out in October. And then just in terms of my own creative work, I'm doing a lot of editorial consulting right now
Mm.
and some ghostwriting, which is really a pleasure. And I have clients I really like right now. And then I'm continuing to work. I've been working on a novel the last couple of years, and so when I'm not doing that editorial work, I've been doing that. But in terms of like other books for kids, a lot of ideas, I always do, but nothing that's right on the edge other than the one that's coming out in October.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Jen, as always, it's such a pleasure to catch up with you. I really love all the work that you've done, and certainly have loved all the ways that we've been able to work together. And I thank you for that, and wish you all the best for all the different projects that you're involved in.
Well, thank you so much.
Bye for now. Thanks so much.